folks.
Good morning.
We are being live streamed and video recorded. So I'm Walter Thomas, one of the pastors at Beth Emanuel in Chandler, Arizona. And this is the sixth in a series, I believe it is, isn't it? The sixth lesson in a series on end-time biblical prophecies. Today, I have chosen the topic, Mystery Babylon. You know what I discovered? There is more prophetic chapters on this topic than in the other one. There are 2 full chapters in Jeremiah and most of 4 chapters in Revelation. I didn't really understand that until I was just going through and counting out the verses and reading all those portions of Scripture again this week. But Mystery Babylon has often been the topic of many discussions and hyperbole and speculations, and those kind of get wild and crazy. But what I would like to do today is to examine some of the things that the Word tells us about Babylon. In Jeremiah, it's called Babylon the Great. Understanding that Jeremiah was a contemporary of the Babylonian captivity back in 606 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar, Babylonia, came over to Israel, conquered it as one of the many nations they conquered during that time, making it the Babylonian Empire. And Jeremiah was a prophet that succeeded Isaiah. Isaiah was prophesying before the captivity and slightly into it, and Jeremiah was prophesying all during it. During this time, Jeremiah talks about Great Babylon, and he describes it in chapters 50 and 51 with such terms that it could not be only Babylon that was just 1,400 miles to the east. There is so much more. In fact, Great Babylon is the beginning of those kind of distinctions. So like oftentimes occurs in prophecy, the prophecy speaks to 2 different events. So in one sense, he was prophesying the downfall of Babylon that had his compadres in captivity. But he is describing a great Babylon, suggesting that there was one that was greater than the one that was already in existence. And when you read the characteristics and the prophecies about Great Babylon, it could not be the Babylon of old. For example, it talks about all the ships on the sea that come to it. Well, Babylon is virtually a landlocked place. Okay? And there was no big sea activity coming in the Hormuz Straits, not until they discovered oil. That's the only seaport that they had. And it was really not a seaport, we know it today as Kuwait. Okay? So, chapters 14 of Revelation mentions this and refers to Babylon as Mystery Babylon, and it describes it as a woman. And then it goes on and talks about harlotry and prostitution and all of the adulteries of this city, referred to as she, as Mystery Babylon. It's mentioned somewhat in 15 and 16, but chapters 17 and 18 are totally about Mystery Babylon. So if you did any homework on this, I sent out yesterday the chapters that are involved in this, then you understand something of the context in which we are going to speak. So Babylon, ancient, existed for about 125 years. It was born about 35 years before Nebuchadnezzar took over Israel, and about 62 years into Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Cyrus the Persian overran the nation, which is now modern-day Iran, and Babylonian Empire became the Persian Empire. But that Babylonian Empire was the strong, wicked place that overran Israel and was a secular nation with many, many gods. We have in this story we realize that there is a projected Babylon that is going to be in the end time. And so 500 years after the Babylonian captivity, Jesus gives John the Revelator in Revelation an enormous amount of prophetic words about this future great city-state that he refers to as Babylon the Great and as Mystery Babylon. What I want to do today is to focus on some ideas that I think you might be interested in. I had written a paper on this, and you can see it right here. I've written this over the last couple of weeks. This is, I cut it in half. I had 30-some pages, and so I reduced to what I thought were some pretty essential materials. And so this is for your leisurely bedtime reading. Not that it's leisurely to read, it's pretty heavy. And then I have prepared a copy of the slides that I'm going to be using today. And I noticed that there was 4 or 5 copies of where some of the slides were a little bit of different order, but they're all there. Okay? But I think most of you have a paper that does list the slides completely. Oh, I wish we could get this temperature down in here. Tom, would you mind asking Israel to drop the temperature in this room? I think we're somewhere near 76 or 78 right now. And he has it on his phone, so he can do that. I have an imagination, and so I just allowed it to run a little bit as I was preparing the materials for this. But this is an artist's drawing of some futuristic city that I thought would help us stimulate the imagination of this future Babylon, the great Mystery Babylon. Understanding the key scriptures here are these that I have just mentioned, with primarily Revelation 17 and 18 and Jeremiah 50 and 51. Mystery Babylon, who is it? Who do you think it is? Rome?
Not after last week.
Hong Kong? Paris?
No?
United Nations, maybe?
United Nations has something to do with it, John?
Well, you know, I see that, I think it is the Apostle Peter, when he ends the letter, he said, the church in Babylon greets you. At the end of the letter.
I have to go back and see that. Well, there's going to be a lot of church in Babylon.
And he said, he says, oh, that's the place where also Christ was killed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, that is Jerusalem under heathen power.
It could be, yes, it certainly could be that.
America? Yeah, America. That's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Let's play with it a bit, okay?
I think it is Peter, the end of the letter of Peter.
There are so many scriptures that I could have chosen, but I chose this one to be the verse that I think captures most of what we as believers in the end times need to be aware. A second angel followed and said, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine who drink the adulteries of her maddening wine. And this prophecy occurs 500 years later after the fall of ancient Babylon. So this has nothing to do with ancient Babylon, other than Babylon becomes sort of a prototype of what John the Revelator is talking about. I'm going to step out and give you my definition of Mystery Babylon. It is the global internet of everything. It was referred to as a mystery repeatedly because the physical characteristics of a city could not be identified in his prophecy. There were no geographies. There were no political conditions.
Barb texted and your thing went off.
Would you get tall again, please, Tom?
He's not in the building.
But I remember last time
Our
we did.
phone went off. We're not videoing.
No, it's doing something.
Barb said the sound is gone.
Oh,
Oh, well, who's it, is the young kid in charge of that?
Yeah.
Okay, Israel's not in the building. So I don't know how-
Tall handles it.
What's that?
Tall.
His son's in the booth.
Oh, she said it's back.
It's back, it's back.
It
Okay.
probably shut the
He's
volume
not
off.
fixed.
it was probably
Israel's
that
not
phone
available.
call.
So-
When
Yeah,
the phone
it was a
came in, it
phone
must
call.
have disrupted. Okay.
We're just texting. But
The word internet, for those of us who are older, is actually a created word of two other words. International network. Okay? And so the internet is a global, international network of people who are connected. A network says that they are connected. That somehow they are nested together, they are working together, they belong together, they stick together, they function together. The idea being is that if it were not on the network, then you wouldn't be in, you'd be an outlier, you'd be on the outside of it, okay? I guess I would extend it by saying it is the global internet of everything and everyone. Because you, if you have a password somewhere, you're already in Mystery Babylon. If you have a digital code on the back of your driver's license or other IDs, you have already been encrypted into Mystery Babylon. If your ability to order online requires a digital passcode and credit or debit card, you are in Mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon is the connection of everybody and everything in the world who is able or willing to be connected. Now, if you are an Aborigine on the backside of Australia, maybe you won't be in right away. But I promise you, if you want to eat, you're going to have to. If you want to travel, you're going to have to. If you want to keep your job, you're going to have to. If you are going to be able to communicate, if you're going to be able to buy, if you're going to be able to sell, if you're going to be able to go to school, if you're going to be able to have your children have health care, you're going to have to belong. It says that the woman will ride the beast. The beast is Islam. I want to get disconnected here. And it says it's going to ride the beast because they have common enemies. And that's anyone who acknowledges the Lord Jesus Christ as Lord of all, or any kind of God that they say takes precedent over the secular state, which Islam has that same kind of value. So it'll be used, Islam will be used to keep the non-industrialized peoples in line. But the internet and the city on the hill, this great city, this metroplex that spans the globe, is connected by all of the banking and financial connections that we can have. I have a dear friend, she passed away this spring, but she was an attorney in the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. She worked back and forth between the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. She had the responsibility for all of the African nations' banks. In other words, if the Bank of the Congo needed liquidity or needed a loan, she would be the one who would go to the National Monetary Fund and decide if whether or not liquidity was adequate, resources were adequate, in order for them to put liquidity into their currency, which of course was not the dollar, but it always had to be matched against the dollar. The internet is attached to the petrodollar. And if you understand what happened back in the 70s when Nixon was president, he took the country off of the gold standard for our currency and attached it to the barrel of oil. It became a petrodollar rather than a gold-based dollar because oil was more the commodity of the day than was gold. And nations that produce oil entered into a treaty with the United States. If you will require everyone who buys your oil to do so in dollars, we will protect you in your oil fields, which is why we got into the Gulf War. Okay? And everyone who trades with Mystery Babylon has to somehow deal with the dollar, whatever it floats as. And so if you are the chairman of the bank, the National Bank in Congo, your currency is always weighed as to how it floats against this particular dollar. All of that